Are you familiar with FBI Special Agents Kyle Seraphin?
I'm familiar with the name.
Is that yes?
I'm familiar with the name. Familiar with the name. Familiar with the name.
Let's bring in Kyle Seraphin. He's the FBI whistleblower who helped expose government censorship of our First Amendment rights.
Now, we only have this memo because a recently suspended FBI agent called Kyle Seraphin brought it to the public, and we're grateful that he did. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
He's the host of something that strangely is called the Kyle Seraphin Show.
Kyle Seraphin, I can't thank you enough for speaking out. I knew you guys were out there, and I knew it was just a matter of time, but you got a lot of guts putting your face and your name to this. You're doing a service on behalf of the American people, and from the bottom of my cracked and broken heart sometimes, thank you very much.
Take a look behind the curtain with a real whistleblower and American patriot. Prepare to embrace the uncomfortable truth because this program has no time for comforting lies. Here is civil liberties enthusiast, Second Amendment defender, and recovering FBI agent Kyle Seraphin.
Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to the Kyle Seraphin Show. Today is Thursday. It is May the 2nd. Is that right? That's what it says on the computer here. May the 2nd. We just got raided by the AMRAD Pod. Thanks for joining us. If you guys were just watching Steve and Garrett over on AMRAD Pod, you can find them at rumble.com/AMRAD Pod, and they do that live on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And they dump right into us, and we get going at 0930 here Eastern Time on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. If you guys are in the live chat, which you can see, folks are saying we are rolling already. You guys can hit the like button. You can hit the subscribe button if you want to follow the channel. You can also hit the notifications. That little bell lets you know when we go live. Although I always get those updates like very, very late in the game. Maybe you guys do as well. I get all of Seb Gorka's updates like an hour and a half or 2 hours after he's already been rolling. Anyway, welcome to our channel today. If you guys are watching anywhere else, there is a link in the description to get to rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin, where you can join us over here. And we've got an outstanding and fantastic guest I'm looking forward to. As usual, he may not be a unique experience over here on the Kyle Seraphin Show, but he is one of our favorites. We've got Steve Baker going to jump on in just 1 second. Before we do that, let's go ahead and say thanks to the sponsors that keep the program on the air. And most importantly, I wanted to read a review from one of you coming in from Twitter, patriotcoolers.com. patriotcoolers.com, promo code Kyle. Here you go. This is a good afternoon, Kyle, coming from John. Heard of you first on the Dan Bongino Show. Then I heard your story. I subscribed to your podcast. I've been listening ever since. I'd like to say thanks for your no BS, Christian-based worldview and commentary. But I also wanted to say I was looking for a high-quality cooler to use in barbecue competitions and camping and traveling, so I gave Patriot Coolers a try. Tried out the 50-quart cooler. That's the same one that I have, and I love it. He said, unfortunately, even though the workmanship was top-notch and the quality was excellent, FedEx damaged it during shipping. They dropped a brake rotor on it or something, and so there was only cosmetic damage, no functional damage, no internal damage. Took pictures and sent it to Patriot Coolers to let them know. And I said I didn't want to return it. I just wanted them to know what happened. They said they insisted on making it right and that they would either give me a 50% refund on the price I paid or send me a brand new cooler and tell me to keep the old one. Absolutely blown away by that kind of customer service. You just don't see it anymore. Just wanted to let you know that I'll be a lifelong customer to Patriot Coolers. Thanks for keeping them as a sponsor. You betcha. That's how we do it. They're great people. Guys, promo code Kyle, Kyle, at patriotcoolers.com. That's how you can go and get your own. The 50 quart is the way to go, by the way. It's awesome. It's great for the weight, and it works really well, and we appreciate them sponsoring us. Also, just say a little quick thanks to my buddies over at Catholic Vote. We have a new channel over. It's rumble.com/Catholic Vote, so you guys can follow them there. You can go to catholicvote.org and get the loop if you want to get the best 2 to 3 minutes of emails, and they also actually are putting links to our new little podcast that we're doing with them called Between the Lines. Long-form commentary, but it's still a short podcast. Does that make sense? It's a long on one topic as opposed to what we do today where we're hitting more and more current events. Let's not waste any more time. Let's bring the man and my friend. There he is. Oh, I got to unmute you up here on the click standby, Mr. Steve Baker. Steve, welcome back to the program.
Good morning, Kyle. How
Good morning.
Are you today?
You look very dapper. I like that purple on you.
Hey, thank you. I'm just trying to explore my inner queerness this morning. You know,
Stop. How dare you? Oh, that's too.
Well, I just read this article by or at least a post from the Oversight Project at Heritage, posting a new governmental initiative in our farming community to bring queerness to our farming community, because Lord knows that for our food development, that is the most important thing that we need to make sure that everybody is well fed and our food supply is safe.
With queer people.
Queerness.
Everybody who's ever been around a farm knows that's actually one of the most important things that all farmers discuss is sexuality. It's usually referred to as husbandry, though, and they're just talking about whether the right animals are getting on top of the other right animals. So maybe we're trying to do some cross-pollination there, some explore the sexuality of animals.
Can you even use that word husbandry anymore? Is that that sounds rather politically incorrect?
It probably is, but I'm fairly confident that's the scientific term on it. There are entire degrees in the agricultural universities, which are, even those can't get away from the fact that male plus female equals little babies, and then you get more of whatever you're looking for, right?
I just remember, growing up and being out in the rural areas of Louisiana, we had to move around the implements of husbandry on the highways. Yeah.
I have a question for you as someone who grew up in that area. Is it possible that the state of Louisiana's primary export are mosquitoes?
Well, believe it or not, there's a state that's worse than Louisiana with regard to mosquitoes, and that's Minnesota. Minnesota is, you wouldn't think so.
Land of lakes, though.
That far. What's that?
Land of lakes. It's the water thing.
That's it. You got over 10,000 lakes. You got, 10 gazillion mosquitoes. So it's pretty bad, really, really bad up there.
Steve,
and I've lived in both extremes, so I can attest to that.
I assume that. I did a walk across the country. We went from San Antonio, the Air Force Base there, and we walked all the way out to the panhandle of Florida. And
wow,
Louisiana was hands down the worst, although very cool too, because like some of the neatest people in the middle of nowhere, just on rural Route 90, and you're out there, or US Highway 90, and you're just in the middle of nothing, and you can't see anything, and then suddenly there's a bar, and it's mom and pop bar, and really nice people. But as we were kind of rucking through this area, we double timed it past all of the mosquito pits, which are, I think, growing rice officially, but in reality, it's just mosquitoes. And we would have black sheets of mosquitoes that hit on the sweat of our bodies, and you would just wipe them off, and you'd have just a handful of them. And you probably could eat them if you wanted to die from encephalitis or whatever they have. All right, let's set up what we're going to be talking about today, because I think we've got some fun stuff to get into. We want to talk about the curious case of John Sullivan, which you've been doing some reporting on. You got some credit from Ryan Riley over at NBC, who you have respect for, but I don't. So that's always fun when the curious respectfulness comes in. And then I also want to do a discussion about investigative journalism. We have you actually titled on the lower third here as an investigative journalist. I think you earn that title. There are others that claim it. I want to kind of do a primer for folks. We've done a little bit of this, but the critical evaluation tools required to look at novel information coming in from quote unquote investigative journalists, and how do we assess whether or not they are in fact investigating, or they're just spewing their own feelings. So that's where I kind of want to go, if that works for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about John Sullivan. Why is John Sullivan an interesting case? I want you to kind of set up who he is, what his relevance was to the January 6th, maybe the legends around January 6th, and then who he actually was, and kind of what happened with him.
Well, let me lay the groundwork by saying that just the fact that you and I are going to discuss this topic here is going to put you and I both yet again, or should I say even more clearly, on a lot of people's targets, because you can't tell the truth about the conspiratorial sacred cows without them painting you with the same brush. Kyle, look. Just this morning, reading after you posted that we were going to be doing this today, I'm seeing people saying that nobody's going to watch this. I've got a tweet here from a guy that tags you and me, and he says that we're part of a multi-channel network of shills that have infiltrated the truth movement to attack Trump and Q by attacking General Flynn. And I don't even know what that means.
I don't know what that means either. But here's the best part. That guy doesn't know what that means either.
Well, either that, I've come to the conclusion over the last 5 or 6 days especially, that these guys are just making shit up. I mean, because you can't be as disconnected from reality and completely. I mean, are they that ignorant? I mean, I had this one guy who's absolutely online saying that he's going to take me down. He's going to reveal the truth about me. He's going to reveal the truth about my connections to all the various underground agencies, all of the dark money, all of the federal, psyops groups. He's going to prove it all.
Yeah.
So he leads that. So this is what he leads with. He says, for instance, on January 6th, you didn't even attend Trump's speech so that you could be on the front line to attack the Capitol. And I'm like, my videos of me at Trump's speech have been online for over 3 years.
Factually inaccurate.
It takes that much of work. I mean, just Googling to prepare yourself for a statement like that and to lay the groundwork for his own veracity and what he's going to do, calling himself an investigative journalist, by the way. So there's the ground. I set you up there.
Well, it sets up what I think. When we first spoke, the first time that you and I ever sat down, one of the things that I think I dropped on you that has resonated was the idea that January 6th was this American Rorschach test. When you look at it and tell me what you see, I know a lot more about the other things that you see. I can assess the way that you look at the world and whether your ability to evaluate things critically or not, and so on. So I'm going to add another thing to it. The way that people reacted to the 2020 COVID hysteria was a fork in the road for many people, including conservatives. It was definitely a fork. Like, I think 2016 was a fork in the road for people on the left. They decided that they could either say, I don't like Donald Trump, but I'm a human being and we'll see what happens. Maybe it'll be good, maybe it'll be bad. We'll just assess each individual action. That was the left's fork. And some of them just said, no matter what happens, this guy is Hitler reincarnate. And so everything he does is bad. So that was the left. On the right, I think 2020, we went and we saw people who otherwise believe in systems. They believe in institutions like the media. If it's on, like, I've had people tell me, well, it's on TV. It must be, like, they must have checked that, right? It's like, well, no, you don't know how TV works or radio or anything else or podcast. But but people had an opportunity and they divorced themselves from all of these pillars, these anchors that help them kind of like root their sanity in some sort of grounding. And that was the media, and that was law enforcement, it turns out. It was public health. It was the medical institutions, and it was government, because public health and government were intertwined. The media was out there pushing the narrative. The law enforcement was the ones actually out there on the front lines, shutting down business and so on. And so they said, all these things are off. All bets are off. And they had two options. Trust no one, which is the old X-Files piece, which is why I actually have the X-Files on my wall. I have that little, I want to believe, but also trust no one. Or they did what this guy just did, which is that any thought that I have that leaps to my head is good enough, because that's apparently what these institutions are doing. So now I'm going to participate in being whatever I say goes, no facts required.
So with that said, let's talk about John Sullivan and piss everybody off.
Let's do it, because
that's what ultimately happens whenever I talk about this character. And I have to also precurse this conversation by saying, much of what I have personally dismantled about John Sullivan's conspiratorial reputation over the last 6 or 8 months since I've been working on his story has been dismantling my own presuppositions, my own preconceptions, my own misconceptions about him, because I also bought into not just a false narrative, but one that had pretty solid foundation. In fact, at least there was history. At least there was a lot of video of this guy doing controversial things. There's a lot of video of this guy doing Antifa things. There's a lot of video of this guy calling for the ripping Trump out of office, before the November election. There's a video of this guy carrying scary weapons around and wearing black bloc and selling that stuff on his website, and making insightful speeches in that whole Black Lives Matter activist space. So there's
Yeah.
plenty of history there.
Before we
So
get
when
too
you
deep into
start
it,
with that,
well, let me just give people the context too. John Sullivan, many of you guys have seen him. He was the guy that filmed the last few moments of Ashli Babbitt. He filmed the shooting, and he's the guy that sold it to CNN, which I understood. Like, we'll get into where that went and monies and all that kind of stuff. But he was on the ground on January 6th. Many people said he was the best evidence that Antifa was the ones actually leading this charge. He's kind of is he mixed race, or is he part black? He's got darker skin.
Yeah, he's adopted into a white family. He and his brothers are all black young men adopted into a black family.
But you'll see him with the goatee and the mustache. If you've seen the photos, you've seen him with like, I think, a camouflage Trump hat on some of the photos that is going around. He's got kind of like the neck gaiter on. So as you guys are thinking about January 6th and you're thinking of the evidence that there was a bunch of Antifa people running around, John Sullivan is the face of that evidence for most people. And Steve Baker's went after the sacred cow of this must be true. So you've been digging into it wherever you want to go with it.
Yeah, well, it starts just 2 weeks after January 6th. I interviewed his brother.
Okay.
You know, the one thing that must be understood by most people is that John Sullivan, when he was there on January 6th, for whatever his purposes were and whoever else he was connected with or not, whatever his background was or not, he was in fact there shooting a documentary, or actually this young lady by the name of Jade Sacker, who was actually an established documentarian, had chosen to do a story on John and his brother James. They were polar opposites politically. They had a unique background. They were adopted, black kids adopted into a white Mormon family. The father was a retired lieutenant colonel in the Army. And so there was a unique story. So you've got this one brother that has gone hard left in his activism. The other brother's gone hard right in his activism. One of them is apparently associated with Antifa and BLM. The other guy is associated with the Proud Boys. Okay, so that's the basic understanding. So this girl comes in, unique story. I'm going to do this. So when she came to DC on the 5th, she was there to follow John around and whatever his activities were going to be as part of the documentary process. It's what you do when you're a filmmaker. And so that was the function of their day on the 6th. Mm-hmm. And then 2 weeks after that, and then of course, after all that we saw from John Sullivan, and I consider him at least one of the top 3, top 5 most significant figures, certainly most interesting figures of January 6th, of all of them. And in that, learning as quickly as I did about his brother, I managed to get his brother on a podcast just 2 weeks later and interviewed him. And his name's James Sullivan. And James proceeded during this time to tell me a string of lies that I did not know was a string of lies at the time. Turns out the brothers don't like each other very much at all. They are highly competitive. They are not blood brothers, by the way. They were adopted by from 2 different black parentages, and so they were brought together into this family. Mm-hmm. And they became very competitive as teenagers, and sometime in their late teens they actually became very estranged. And then over the last several years, haven't spoken to each other at all, but they've spoken about each other quite a bit. More so James about John than John about James. And then suddenly, with all of this attention that John earned on January 6th because of that video he shot,
right?
Look, we would have known about John for his antics on January 6th, but we would have never considered him one of the most interesting figures, except for the fact he caught the definitive video of the day. He caught the single most dramatic video of the day: somebody being killed by a law enforcement officer. Mm-hmm. All right. So with that said, and then he was on Anderson Cooper that night with this filmmaker, Jade Sacker. So talking to his brother proceeded to tell me what, I had no reason to not believe him. And, I have my own worldview and I have my own presuppositions about how the world works. And here's the brother that ostensibly is coming from the right side of the political ledger, which I, of course, lean more to anyway. And so consequently, I took what he told me about John's activities that day as truth. To to the point that for at least 2 years, I just assumed that what he told me was correct, that John, for instance, had been recruiting for many weeks to bring an entourage of Antifa, or his followers, to D.C. That day. And there is some Discord channels where, in fact, John was making the attempt to do that. And he was putting the invitations out there. And he was posting that they were going to meet and have a confab at the Washington Monument at 11 a.m. on January 6th before they went and did all of their, dastardly deeds. And so that was the plan. And then he told me that morning in BLM Square, early that morning, that John was there with boxes full of Trump hats, handing them out in BLM Square to all of the followers that would wear those Trump hats and then obviously go in and start doing their destructive processes, as Antifa is known to do. And John was going to lead that.
If we were going to be in the statement of facts, the affidavit, this would be the hereafter known as the plan, would be throwing on Antifa hats or throwing on Trump hats and going and doing Antifa stuff, ostensibly as Trump supporters.
That's exactly right. And that he was also part of that plan is that his followers from all over the country were going to embed themselves in all of these buses. So the local buses, these groups, right-wing groups that were advertising, or pro-MAGA groups were advertising that we're going to take 50 people from such and such a town in Kansas or whatever, and we're going to go to D.C., and that they were going to surreptitiously embed themselves in those groups. And that's how they were going to all arrive and get there. So this was the plan. And some other details as well. So I carried that with me for the next couple of years, but I never forgot about Sullivan. And then all of a sudden, basically, Sullivan dropped off of the radar screen of the mainstream media. Anybody can Google this if they want to. By July of 2021, he was no longer discussed. Now, he had some legal proceedings. Obviously, there were things happening in his case because he was arrested. He was charged with a series of crimes, including felonies that day. Mm-hmm. He had received payments for his video of Ashli Babbitt being killed in excess of $90,000. He received $35,000 from CNN, $35,000 from NBC, a few other chunks of change from some other agencies around the country. But the bottom line is that once he was arrested, the government seized that money, because ostensibly you're not supposed to profit from participating in an illegal event. So that's their justification for seizing that money. I think by the time they got it.
Do you want to tell people how exceptional that amount of money is? Everyone thinks that if you catch this great shot, that suddenly you're going to be wealthy. Even $90,000, it's a lot of money, but it's not that much money. That could be gone in a year. You caught a pretty good video as well. I would say one of the top few most definitive videos, right, of Ashli Babbitt actually being wheeled out. And that resulted in what kind of payments to you? Ballpark.
I've probably made over the last 3 years somewhere in the realm of about $3,000 off of that video.
So 90,000 is relatively exceptional, which is you're not usually paid for the content that you catch. It's usually the duration of the video. You're paid by the minute or by the second, some sort of thing of that, and then a little bit of a bump based on how noteworthy it may have been.
Yeah, that's about it. So, for instance, when HBO licensed my videos directly for their documentary, which came out, I think, in November of 21, and they licensed a dozen clips from me, mm-hmm. and the basic rate for documentary work and for film work is about $1,000 a minute. All right, those 12 clips did not equal to about $700. All right, so I got a credit on an HBO documentary, but my grand total was $700 out of the whole thing, and then they only used 4 clips.
Of course,
they licensed 12, they used 4, and that's how it works.
Right. And I just wanted people to have that clarity of vision. Yeah. One, the discrepancy between the cost and obviously that was the video of the day, but still, $90,000 is very high, and you caught some others that were in close running to that, and that's not where you got paid.
Maybe so, but bottom line is you're not going to get wealthy off of one of those. You got to be a guy out there doing it every single day, like BG on the Scene or Ford Fisher or some of these other guys that are professional riot chasers, and they always seem to be in the right place at the right time. But when you're the same guy that catches Kyle Rittenhouse's 3 shots, and you're also the same guy that catches the first barricade breach at the January 6th and the first breach of the doorway on January. You got a golden horseshoe up your investigative ass, I would say. But
well, some people, I mean, that's just an exposure thing, right? If you're at enough places, eventually you're going to be in the right place. And I think anyone who's been in crowds that are non-friendly, you start getting a sense of reading a crowd. Reading a crowd is just like watching a guy. I've been on rivers before. You've probably done this too. You get on a river and somebody tells you, oh, that's where the rock is, and there's this there. And they can see the hydrology by just looking at the top of the water, and they know what's underneath it. I don't know what's underneath it. People who chase crowds like that, they start feeling that energy. They know where things are about to get spicy, and they angle themselves. But it takes, exposure to it. So anyway, okay, so that's what's going on. John Sullivan gets the $90,000 hit. He has the money taken away because you can't profit from your crime. He's been charged, and he disappears off the radar somewhere in 2021, in July, you said.
Yeah, July 21, he goes away. He disappears. The only appearance mention whatsoever is on the first anniversary of January 6th of 22. He did a couple of local television appearances out of Salt Lake City area where he lived, because you got to understand he was also under house arrest at the time because he was not put in pretrial detention. A lot of people go, well, see, he's obviously a plant. He's obviously a Fed. He's a favored son of the government narrative because he wasn't put in pretrial detention. Well, he wasn't put in pretrial detention, as most of those who were nonviolent were not. There are a couple of exceptions, like Enrique Tarrio, Stuart Rhodes, Ken Harrelson, the Oath Keepers that were not violent, that were also put in pretrial detention. But that's a whole nother can of worms and a genuine conspiracy that we'll just say. Mm-hmm. But the point being is that he did disappear completely. There were just hundreds and hundreds of motions and things filed back and forth. There was a lot of legal work taking place behind the scenes that was just not being covered by the press at all. And again, the conspiracy is, that they were covering it up. No, that's just the way that these legal affairs correspondents with mainstream media work. They don't typically cover all of the back channel stuff that's going on between trial attorneys and the government, the prosecutors, and what the judges' minute rulings are and things of that nature. Unless it's Donald Trump, then we hear everything. We hear every time one of them flushes a toilet. But that's the difference between a figure like John Sullivan and Donald Trump. But he did pop back up on my radar screen because I was actively watching and waiting for when his trial would happen, because I had the misconception that, in fact, maybe they were trying to make this guy's, crimes, sins, whatever, go away, because he had a couple of judge changes. Interestingly, another thing added to his conspiracy theory is his first judge was named Sullivan. So, I've had people ask me online, wasn't he related to the judge? Was the judge his dad? Was the judge his uncle? Things of that nature.
Right. Because that's how the system works. The system is so blind that we're willing to give a kid into the same courtroom as his dad. Who, by the way, his dad was an adoptive father, as you mentioned. So even that's funny. So it's like, come on, guys.
Right. And then to make conspiratorial matters worse is the fact that John and James Sullivan's father, being a former a retired lieutenant colonel from the Army, he had the exact same name as an Air Force general actually involved in the intelligence community, and with some controversial past, actually reprimands from the government in that regard. So to this day, that persists, is that the Air Force general is his dad, and therefore obviously he's connected. All of this, though, and it doesn't matter how many times you set the record straight; they just don't believe you.
Well, this is something we talk about in this program a lot: the illusory truth effect, which is to say that once something gets lodged in someone's brain, then they're unwilling to let that depart with novel and accurate information. They hold on to the old lie instead of the new truth, which is now being exposed. So that's part number one. But the other thing, it also tells us just how uncritical those out there making comments who are fully comfortable saying things that are absolutely false, making allegations that you or I are getting a government paycheck, that we're somehow deep state operatives. I saw it this morning. Apparently, James O'Keefe was out there talking about how Seb Gork and I work for the CIA. Like, all of this stuff is comically stupid. But if you're willing but if you've given up the anchors of reality and everything that I think is a good idea, and I'm just going to hold on to it, and not only am I going to hold on to it, I'm going to scream it from the roof and say that it's true because I believe it, and that's good enough for me. Then we end up in this world where John Sullivan could be anything, and his dad could be a general that's a secret that's, working against the government. Like, all this stuff is silliness. But these are all symptoms of the real disease. The disease is a disconnection from reality, which is it's the saddest part of the whole thing, I think, is that people have just given up on trying to find out what is true with a capital T.
And this is how easy it can happen. All right. I consider myself to be a critical thinker. I'm very much a skeptic. I'm not somebody that buys into conspiracy theories very easily anyway. But I had his brother implant in my mind 2 weeks after January 6th that John was handing out MAGA hats in BLM Square. So fast forward more than 2.5 years later, almost 3 years later, this kid finally comes to trial, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be there. I am going to cover this trial. I am going to cover the trial of somebody who possibly, quite likely, was involved in setting this whole thing up in some manner, some way, whatever. That's what I'm thinking going into this trial. And one of the things, particularly in a trial like that, is that the government is going to put together a video reel of every single moment of that kid's life that's ever been on video as part of their presentation, which is what they did. But more importantly, to me, having gone into this with the idea, now I've seen videos of John that day. It never registered to me that he was wearing a black hat, because James had implanted that thought in my head.
That it was a red hat.
Well, that it was actually a camo hat, but it was a camo MAGA hat.
Right, but what I'm saying is that in your mind, this is almost like that change blindness. You expect to see something, and even though you're seeing the reality is different, it doesn't necessarily enter in that your brain is replacing it with this new information. Everybody, and I think there are pictures of him, but they're from other days, where he's wearing a red hat with the black gator. That's the famous picture. Yeah. So when that's in your head, and that's a famous picture that is being explained, and they do this all the time with like Trayvon Martin. Everybody has this picture of Trayvon Martin graduating high school, even though he was years away from that. So or Michael Brown, this is a game that is played in the media. Introduce the image and let that sit. And in the same way, the brother of this guy, James Sullivan, introduced red MAGA hat into your head. He's handing him out in the square. You've seen a picture of him with a red MAGA hat, so that's in your mind. It's hard to break that out because, again, it's that illusory truth effect. There's a reason why we hold on to that. I've talked about the biology of it, but you want to be able to hold on to information that's been repeated if it's folklore for your people, because it might keep you from eating a berry that kills you, or going down a cliff that's going to end up in your death, or some animal that looks friendly but ends up tearing your throat out, whatever that may be. There's a reason why we hold on to these things historically, like going back into antiquity. But anyway, all right. So we've got this guy. He's wearing a camo hat.
I'm now at the trial, and I'm actually running into and having conversations in the courthouse hallway, in the dining hall, with John Sullivan and his mother. I'm having conversations. And the first thing that I learn is that John Sullivan himself is not the monster that he even presented himself to be. And when I say a monster, the left-wing, hard left radical activist, he was actually a very gentle, very well-spoken, when he's speaking in front of a BLM crowd, he will do what Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris do. They will take on the affectations of that more ghetto kind of voice, whatever. He doesn't speak that way at all. He was raised in a white Mormon military household
and speaks accordingly.
He doesn't talk right, and he speaks that way, and he's very intelligent. And so he was a very, very different guy in this setting. In the trial itself, now, as I mentioned before, now we're starting to see the videos, and it's more than just a day in the life of Sullivan. They're showing history, they're showing the day before, but when the day starts, basically you have to understand, not only are there 2 active cameras going almost all day long. I'm talking about from the time they leave the hotel till the time they get back to their hotel. You have Jade Sacker's camera going, the documentarian. You have his camera going. He has at least one or two cameras going at all times. And then, of course, all of the other interactions they have with CCTV, other open source video captured from police body cams to other people's cell phones, other photojournalists in the area. There was an amazing avalanche of video of him on that day. And the first thing that kicked my ass was no MAGA hat. Ever. All day.
That photo
Not
is from
once.
not that day.
And if I had that wrong in my mind, what else did I have wrong?
And all of this goes back to 2 weeks after January 6th. A guy told you there was a box of red MAGA hats. We're handing them out in BLM Square, and that's going to be the game. And that's what happened on that day. You've held onto it. You've internalized it. You've made it true in your mind. And then you're debunking it by watching the actual video, this novel truth coming in, presented by the government, which is going after the guy.
And I have said multiple times in my writings and in my interviews, podcasts, and otherwise, is that I have changed my mind about incidents and characters related to January 6th many, many, many times. Because the more information, the more new data you get, the more evidence, the more videos that are revealed. If you're not honest enough with yourself to learn from the new evidence as is presented, then you're just not an honest broker and you don't deserve to be doing this job. And so when I was faced with that situation, the trial is already on. I am now digging apart and I am shredding every preconception I had. So as far as I was concerned in that moment, every single thing that I had carried with me for over 2.5 years in my mind about John Sullivan was all on the table. There were no sacred cows whatsoever. Everything was open to examination at this point, and I was open to learn what the reality was.
This is the critical feature, and this is why I think that our two topics are gonna blend very well. This mindset of being open to being wrong, because that's what you're talking about. You had a preconceived conception or a preconceived notion of who this man was. You believed it. You had information that some people would call evidence, but we would more accurately call it was just a data point. That was a guy talking. That guy didn't turn out to be an honest broker. He was moving some agenda. You find that out later. But you have this belief based on some information. And then it's kind of like I always think of this as like Plato's cave, the allegory of the cave, right?
Yeah.
So if people are not familiar with this famous allegory, this famous story, it's people sitting and they're looking at impressions on the wall of a cave. There are some reflections and they're seeing the shadow, and they believe the shadows are the reality. Right up until they step out of the mouth of the cave and realize that they are just seeing a projection. It's a shadow. People are also in 3 dimensions. They are not just shadowy figures that are projected on the wall. And there is so much more depth and reality to it. And you have to basically throw out all your notions and say everything that I believed was accurate, that the whole world was just a cave, silhouette show. It is not that. There is more to it. And I was just sitting in a tiny little area looking through this tiny little scope. You've done that, but this is a broader lesson, I think, for the way people need to be taking in information. Whatever it is that you want to believe, you should immediately start from the assumption that it's false and try to disprove what it is that you want to believe. That's the I want to believe, but also trust no one attitudes. You want to believe, that's human nature. You like someone talked to you and he told you a story. Why would you not want to believe him? Because it's tough to think people sat there and lied to your face or that they don't know anything.
Well, it's especially impactful when the person telling you this is his brother.
Right.
And you also haven't done the background on the brothers yet to find out that they had been estranged for several years and were bitter rivals, did not like one another, weren't speaking. I think if I remember what the mother told me is that I think by January 6th, the two brothers hadn't even spoken in like 3 years.
But you're bringing this idea that the concept of brother equals two people that know each other, respect each other, support each other, all the things that you brought. That's your lens of looking at the word brother and who this person would be if this was your brother, perhaps.
Right.
But then you'd find out, like, I've got a brother I haven't spoken to in 8 years, like on his choice. He hasn't spoken to me. So if you said, oh, this guy has an opinion, he hasn't seen me in a decade. He doesn't know anything about what I'm about. And but you don't know that if you just take the word brother and you assign value to it. So again, it's that dismantling all the way down. This is a guy. This is a biological or a familial relationship, but it doesn't mean what their actual personal relationship is. We got to just deconstruct all this stuff.
Yeah.
And it takes a ton of work. I'm sure Go ahead.
Yeah, and you might have a brother who is running a crack house, and you drop a dime on him to the local cops because you're trying to save him. You're doing that out of love for him. So there's all of these. You don't automatically.
I could be running a crack house and I don't want the competition. So there could be there's a lot of motives that can happen with just the same fact pattern. Anyhow, I just want people to be critical thinkers and distrust what you and I are saying as well. They should go out there and read it. Assume that people are not giving you an honest take if you don't know what their angle is. And in the case of the brother, you didn't know his angle. So here you are.
Yeah, and I don't want to spend this whole time going through every single incident of John's life that I believe does not comport with the conspiracy theories, because those who have already bought in are not going to let it go anyway.
True.
They're going to further attack me and you for even having this conversation, so it doesn't matter anyway. But I'll give you just an overriding blanket idea about this to kind of allow us to move on to whichever direction you want to go next. Is that Sullivan, and by the way, John Sullivan, and having spoken with his parents, interviewed both his mom and his father, we don't all agree on my final conclusions after I've put everything through my much more critical thinking filter than I did initially 2.5, 3 years ago, after I've gotten infinitely more data about him, about his life, about his prior career, his career as an activist in the BLM Antifa space, all of these things. The one thing that I know about him, and this is my conclusion, and it's not his father's conclusion, is that I believe that this kid was a wannabe leader in that space. He actually, on his YouTube videos that he posted even after his arrest, when he was not supposed to be involved in social media because that was one of his pre-trial restrictions, he was still posting online, and he typed himself out in his titles of his videos, BLM Antifa leader.
Yeah,
that's what he called himself. All right.
And that almost always is a role that you choose for yourself as opposed to a title somebody else ascribed. I mean, it's one thing if the media calls you that, unless he was being sarcastic. Is there any chance he was doing that in a fun way?
That's what he claimed later. So when I interviewed him in the courthouse and talked to him about that, because I have screenshots of that. I took screenshots of those, some of those videos, and he indeed flat out told me that he was trolling by doing so.
I mean, I can't discount that, because if you go look at the bio that I've chosen, I've seen your bio as well. You and I have a sense of humor that is fairly dry to certain people, especially in writing. So when I tell people I'm a constitutional extremist or a civil liberties enthusiast, that's actually pretty silly. That's a joke that doesn't land to everybody. They go, well, he's a constitutional extremist. It's like, no. I'm just saying that the basic liberties should be everybody's business. I'm trying to point myself out that should be a regular guy thing. Same way I've seen your pronouns that you've listed, which are funny. It's just some people have a take that in plain writing doesn't always convey. So he made some arguments that hopefully he was trying to convey. It didn't stop him from being convicted.
No, it didn't. But he. So let me finish up that first thought, and then we'll get into the aftermath. Is that what I saw from all of the video, and I've seen more video than anybody else. I'm the only journalist that covered every single minute of his trial. Nobody else did. There were some guys that came in and out. Your buddy Ryan Riley, he came in and out of the courtroom a few times. There was other things going on. It's a big courthouse. There's a lot of trials going on. They're going in and out. They're bouncing around. Yeah, a guy from Washington Post, a guy from WUSA 9, the girl from Gateway Pundit. There were some others that came in and out, but I sat my ass in that hard bench every single day for 5-6 days of that trial and never left. And And so the point being is that I had access to more information, the good and the bad, the prosecution and the defense. And then I had more access to video that nobody's seen, because John Sullivan himself has given me 2 hours of unreleased video that I have not gotten permission to release yet. Everybody goes, release it, release it. I don't have permission.
That's not
It's
how
not
you
mine.
operate.
I don't own it.
Right.
Right. I don't own it. And so I'm hoping that once he's transferred to his, wherever he's going to live out the next 5 or 6 years of his life, that facility, then he will ultimately be processed and be given access, and I can go sit down with him and do a jailhouse interview with him. And I hope to get permission either from him or his family to release some of this video.
Does he have a criminal record? A prior criminal record?
No, not a criminal record, although he was arrested at another event, a BLM style protest in Provo, Utah, that he helped organize. There was a shooting there. And because he was the organizer of the event, he was arrested as an accessory. But the reality is that he had no part in that shooting whatsoever, and that he was released and charges were dropped.
So no federal criminal convictions before. So he should be dealing with the First Step Act as well, which is to say something like a 50%. He's sentenced to 6 years. We should see about 50% and change of that served would be the expectation.
Yes, there is the first step, but then there is also the January 6th step, we'll just call it. Basically, these guys are being forced to serve 75 to 80% of their time, regardless of what has. And there's controversy about that as well.
Understood. But essentially, the full 6 years, maybe not, but he's going to do hard time in a federal prison, which is not going to be a fun thing for him, which is not what you'd expect for someone who was on the conspiratorial setup that was leading the MAGA people to their fates. He also went down for this. Is the real
and I don't have to say this to you, but I'll do it as well anyway as a test. What do you think the conspiracy theorists are saying about his 6 years?
Oh, now we got to make all kinds of excuses. The mental pretzel work, right? Is that what we're talking about? That it's not going to actually be served, or he's going to be doing something different?
Yeah, he's going to be on an island in Bali somewhere, or he's going to be in one of the
the DOJ luxury hotels that they put you in instead of jail.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
But listen, once you go down the rabbit hole of anything I believe is good enough, then you also can go down the rabbit hole of fantasy. It's the reason why people who know nothing about the federal government, who know nothing about the DOJ, who know nothing about the process, who've never seen this before, who've never paid attention, they have all these like novel ideas, none of which are based in reality or fact. And so, of course, why wouldn't there be a DOJ black site on Bali where you can put your most favored operative so they can serve their time in a nice way? This is a fantasy world. Our government is not that functional. You've seen a lot of it recently. You want to give people kind of a little insight on how functional and how capable the U.S. federal government is at pulling off anything from what you've been able to see?
Well, the first thing that you always do is you default to incompetence before you go to malevolence or malfeasance.
How often are you right in that guess?
99% of the time, because when you're talking about the larger the government, the more incompetent it's going to be by default, by rule. And we have the largest government in the history of the world. Therefore, we have the single most incompetent government in the history of the world. So you have to start there every single time.
It's a good assessment, by the way.
Yes. And so with that foundation again laid, you go back to this overview that I have of Sullivan, is that he was a wannabe in the space. He was actively self-promoting to the extent that even the Antifa and BLM groups were disavowing him, forbidding him to come and associate with them and participate in their own events. The Seattle group, before January, November of 2020, they actually put out an alert and a bulletin and said, don't let this guy near us. In fact, they even said and believed that he was a quote unquote double agent of the right.
Mm-hmm.
And guess who believes that? His own father.
Right. Of course. When is there an analog in another space that we can compare him to, as far as somebody that has this kind of back and forth, like whether it be in the media space that people are calling, this kind of double operator, where there's so many conspiracies and many of them are grounded in non-reality. I'm just putting you on the spot for an analog of some kind.
I'm just thinking of the ones that I know that are double operatives, and that's
fine too.
That's the first things that come to my mind. There are journalists, for instance, that are absolutely mouthpieces for our intelligence community.
Mm-hmm.
When the IC, the FBI, CIA, or anybody, DOD needs to have a CYA story written for them to help cover or help shape a narrative about an event, and this has happened with January 6th,
sure,
as it's happened for decades and decades and decades. There's a reason why we call it the Mockingbird. It is in fact known, and I happen to know of a couple of them myself, that is what they do.
Yeah, there's one or two over at the New York Times, and there's one or two over at Newsweek, and they are friendly sources that are like official, unofficial channels of disseminating
exactly what they are.
The government position. What's interesting is those people are always shown as like, leaking the truth, like this leaked memo, but that leak is an intentional leak, which makes it actually sort of like an unofficial press release. They go right to these folks and they get their side of the story. And almost always, it's not like a reveal. It's almost always a threat when I look at it, because I know who these guys are. I can't think of the guy's name over at Newsweek, but I know his first name is William. Who am I thinking of?
Arkin.
Yeah, Arkin. Yeah,
William Arkin.
So and he did the piece about the sort of like the agave, and he sort of like released that. Well, first of all, Steve Friend and I have been talking about that for a while. But when you look at it, that's not a reveal. That's a threat saying we're going to be coming after these people, and you're on notice. And it also tells the people that are friendly to that, going like, look, we're going to go after these people. Don't you worry about it. We see them just like you see them. In any case, there are operatives like this that are real. The problem is when some people are an op and other people just act foolishly, then you get those folks that just everything is an op because they just get so simple. They're overwhelmed. In the training environment, we would call that like overwhelmed by circumstances. It's when there's too many stimuli and you just can't process. You just go, everybody's a Fed, which is so lazy.
Yeah. Well, and I like I said, I keep trying to close this thing up a little bit so we can move on past Sullivan.
Sure.
But let me just give you a couple of these other examples of what you were talking about here. Once they have it, and you mentioned the biology of it, and there truly is a biological function to this inability to dismiss the reality that you've created in your own mind. But I've had people over the last few days since I did this kind of synopsis about Sullivan on X after his sentencing hearing on Friday, that have sent me photos of who they thought was Sullivan, another black guy in the area, even in the area of or a dark-skinned guy in the area of the Babbitt shooting, and said, see, there he is wearing his red MAGA hat. And no, that's not Sullivan. And the worst ones are the ones that send me the photo of that guy from Sullivan's camera. So it's across the room. So Sullivan's holding the camera way over here. This guy is across the room. They have no idea that photo is coming from his camera.
Right.
It's a screenshot from that, and they don't know it. And it's rather embarrassing when you get into the racial aspect of that. Is you realize you just fell into the whole deal of, you seen one black guy, you seen them all, kind of, because that's exactly what they ended up revealing themselves as doing.
The best thing is I was talking to someone the other day about like a Chinese operative was looking at, probably assumed that some white guy was the same as another white guy. This is a racial stereotypes are just the way we're programmed for our eyes. It's pattern recognition. It's laziness. But yeah, that doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It just means you should always, whatever it is that you assume, you should just try to disprove it, especially when it's coming from the guy's camera that you're claiming is the guy, and the guy's actually holding the camera as is documented by another camera. So in any case, that's very fun. That's a fun little debunk.
Yeah. So, but these types of things are happening. I mean, I've had hundreds of these messages since Saturday of these type. And they say to you, you can't tell me what I saw with my own eyes. Oh, yeah, I can, because what you saw with your own eyes didn't happen.
Right. And
or what you
eyewitness
think you saw.
testimony is famously terrible. It's full of all kinds of things, reconstructed memory. If you told somebody what happened or they went out and read news media, this is why it's really hard for juries to go out there and they have to, a jury of your peers that gives you a fair look. That's why it's not, why the standard of proof in criminal cases is so high. It has to be, beyond any reasonable doubt. You couldn't be a reasonable person who has a doubt. You're supposed to be able to do that. And most people don't even know what that means. I don't even think people can grasp the concept of that. In any case.
And I told people in my X thread on Saturday, I said, if you have, I'm opening it up for a Q&A, and that's what I called it. I called it a Q&A thread. And I will take your respectful and reasonable questions, but as soon as it turns into, this flame war, I'm going to cut you off. I ended up, I know you like to block people. I just mute them. So,
I block them now because I don't want to see that bar that says that they're muted because I know I'll click on it because I want to know, and I just want to get rid of them. I just don't want them to see what I'm doing anymore.
So I spent more time muting people this weekend than I ever have in all of my years on social media because they can't help themselves. They believe what they saw and they send over their evidence that isn't evidence at all. Most of these types of people, they think that their theory is evidence.
Correct.
And if I don't chase their theory, if I don't investigate their theory or their hypothesis or their notion or their hunch, that somehow, some way, I'm obviously a fed myself. And this is, kind of probably where we're going to go, here a little bit more into this call, or this podcast. But the point being to seal up the John Sullivan deal is, in fact, when it came down to the end of the trial, or in the first couple of days, I kind of felt like that the government was mailing it in a little bit, and I was going, and I even tweeted about it. I think they're softballing this thing. Well, he may really be, part of the plan or part of the action on J6. And then they came out with the long knives, Kyle, and they were brutal. They took him down, and they shook. And this kid was a cool, collected operator, but when they really came after him, they broke him because he did testify on his own behalf. And you know how the rule is there. It's a very, very rare person that can stand up under the cross-examination by the prosecutor if it's a good one. And he did not stand up well. Yeah. He cracked and he lied on the stand, and the jury caught the lie. And
that's devastating. Your credibility is gone. There's a reason why law enforcement officers, the minute that you lie on the stand, basically your law enforcement career in testifying is over. They call it
supposed to be.
Yeah, it's supposed to be. It doesn't turn out to be the case, but yeah, they call that giglio. So you have to be truthful, at least to the best of your ability, or you can always say, "I don't know," which that's the Jim Comey technique. It's like I don't recall or I don't know. It's a neat trick. You can only do it so many times. You should recall some things if it was your case, but yeah, honesty and truthfulness, you don't get that back in front of a jury. That's once it's done, it's done. Yep. And the easiest way to not have to worry about that is just saying the things that are true and factual. And if you're in the right, then you're in the right. It doesn't mean that the jury's going to decide in your favor. But I've never been afraid of a cross-examination. I enjoy it. That's not debate, by the way. That's just you ask for information and I will provide it to the best of my ability. So interestingly enough, he did get knifed. He did, get convicted. And 6 years is not the shortest J6 sentence, not even close.
And interestingly, again, for a non-violent offender, the judge remanded him into custody immediately after the jury pronounced him guilty on all counts. And typically that's not the case, even with January 6th defendants. I know that that's what people think. They think that there's 200 people being held in the gulag right now without due process, and they're being denied a trial. And that's not true either. Mm-hmm. There's like 15 or 16 guys currently being held in pretrial detention, and that's it. Now, there's hundreds more who are serving time or have served time related to January 6th, but there's not hundreds being held without a trial. That's another bogus misconception floating around. But he was remanded into custody immediately and thrown into isolation. Now, ostensibly and probably rightfully so, the DC jail put him in isolation because they were not going to put him in the Patriot pod, as they call it, at the DC Gulag with the other J6ers. And so they put him into isolation. And as we know, that's torture in and of itself by another means. And he spent 5 months before his sentencing hearing in isolation. And even my colleagues in the MSM were aghast when they saw him in the courtroom. He had been mentally already broken.
Yeah.
And he was not healthy. And from you see it in the countenance. He was not the same guy they had seen 5 months before.
Isolation is devastating to the human being. We all need some outlet of another person to validate that we exist in the world. It seems like the whole no man's an island game, but Count of Monte Cristo style, you can go back and watch Hollywood's partake of it and just imagine yourself sitting in a place for 5 months where you got nothing but your own thoughts in a brightly lit room, in an uncomfortable bed, and nowhere to move around and no freedom of movement. And your thoughts are only going to go inward and darker. The spiral is going to be there, or you're going to find God and you're going to be on your knees praying, which some people do that as well. And I know friends that have done that. So, people cope with it, but with no training and no background in that sort of thing. And you went out there from, trying to be snarky and funny, and then you're being accused of being one thing. They didn't go easy on this guy is the main point. And he's not living in Bali in the secret DOJ black site for the for the participants that further the regime's agenda.
Yeah, and for the people that say I'll believe it when I see it, well, I talk to his mother frequently, still, and she's brokenhearted.
I bet
those parents love their son, and just as any parent does, regardless of the crime they commit, and they're brokenhearted about what's happening to him, and they're living through the pain of that themselves, and it's real. So this is a real human. He did bad things. He said scary words, just like all of the other J6 defendants that have been overcharged and over-prosecuted and over-sentenced. Again, whether we're talking about the scary words that Stuart Rhodes said, or we're talking about the scary words that John Sullivan said, if I'm being consistent on both sides, I come down on the side that this guy was, in fact, I wouldn't say wrongly prosecuted, but he was certainly over prosecuted. He was over sentenced. He did not deserve 6 years for nonviolent, because by way of comparison, there were, in fact, violent offenders on January 6th, including those who did, in fact, assault law enforcement officers who got less time than this nonviolent defendant.
Yeah, it's all about profile. It seems like the higher profile gets more time. 6 years in federal prison is more than some sex offenders get under creating child pornography. There's a lot of them. Massive assaults with serious physical injuries, life-altering injuries to the victims on Indian reservations. They'll walk away with 2-3 years. They'll be out in 18 to 25 months. So these kind of things happen. 6 years is a long sentence. That is not a guy who was set up for success and is smiled on by the government, and they let him out the back door while they were trying to do something. Anyway, it's interesting. The key is that you learned how to change your perspective, and once again, you saw your own biases, your own instincts coming in from some novel or an initial idea, and then you had to dissuade yourself of that, and that's hard to do. The only way you do that is if you're constantly self-evaluating. You said the words, I had to tear up every preconception that I had, anything that those were all in your head.
It angers, look, I'm one of those guys that I get mad at myself when I get something wrong. That's why I tell people all the time, and I've even done this in the Capitol Police work that I've done. I said I've told and I've challenged people. I've challenged the sedition hunters. I've challenged the Capitol Police. I've challenged the government, the DOJ. I said, if I've got this wrong, give me the data that proves that I'm wrong, and I'll write a story about it. And I did that recently. I initially did a story about one of my sideline stories about former officer Harry Dunn was the N-word that wasn't.
Right.
He was claiming the thing that actually made him famous was not his heroics. That was all built up later. He created that scenario after he was made famous by the press for going out and saying that inside the Capitol, he had a group that were chanting the N-word at him. As many as, this is his quote, 30, 40, 50 people were chanting the N-word at him inside the Capitol. And of course, what I said was, from all the video review I've done, is that it would be absolutely impossible in the most videoed event in the course of human history that if that had taken place, that the MSM would not have led every single January 6th story from then until the end of time with an example of the N-word being chanted. It didn't exist.
That's right.
And it didn't happen. And in that process, I said, in my story, I said, if you have evidence, if you have a video, I said, send it to me and I'll publish it.
Right.
And guess what? A sedition hunter sent me one example of a person in the crowd shouting the N-word. Wasn't in the Harry Dunn scenario. Harry was nowhere near.
Sure.
And nobody could hear it anyway because it was in the cacophony of all the chaos that was going on out there on the West battle line. But it was a cell phone video capturing somebody saying the N-word. And so you know what I did? I wrote a story about it.
Yeah.
I published it.
Here's the one.
Yeah.
But and the key is this. It's like, okay, if I tell you something wild happened and you say, I don't believe you, and then you get evidence that something that is a 1/5 or 1/10 or 1/100th of the thing that I said that was wild, and you say, oh, well, I will accept that 1/100th of what you said is true, and thank you for presenting with you. Will you dial back yours? Because I'm going to go and adjust that. What I said didn't happen. It fractionally happened, and you should do the same. That's how we come towards where truth is. If you come from some wild experience, I mean, I had an experience, you've probably done this before. You ever been in a car accident? Are you the best person to say what the car did as the driver or the passenger in the car that was in the accident?
No, not even close.
Yeah, you have no idea, right? So I know, based on looking at the reconstruction, what must have happened. But my experience is that I spun like a top around and around and around for like 35 minutes across, wet roads. And I ended up, somehow in a place that didn't make any sense up over a median and broke an axle on a vehicle. Hit the rear wheel so hard that it broke the axle inward. None of that makes any sense because it was the driver's side rear. I have absolutely no idea how a left-hand turn resulted in the left side of the vehicle getting hit. It should have been the right hand because the right hand was I should have been spinning counterclockwise, but somehow I had a counter spin that went counterclockwise or went clockwise rather, and I had that rear tire hit. It's like, I don't know what the hell happened. Anybody who saw it probably saw the car like spin and then switch directions. That must have happened. Overcorrected, something like that. That's what goes on. The guy behind the wheel, they don't know. They just see the horizon spinning around and then suddenly they're swearing and, the vehicle's broken forever. Like, that's a terrible feeling. You don't know necessarily. And so that experience of eyewitness testimony is some of the worst, unless the eyewitness is a dispassionate observer that's just sitting out and happens to be, bystander testimony is better than the person who was participating. I don't really care what the participant said. I've had women come and tell me that this is a wild story. You ready for this? Because this will be fun for you. You tell me how likely this is. I was on an Indian reservation and I had two women get into an interview room with us and their parents and their aunts and all the family members, which is always a great way to do an interview, and the police chief for the res. And they told me that they were in a verbal confrontation at a casino on the res. Then they got in their cars and they drove home. And the people that were in the verbal confrontation with them followed them and staked them out for an hour and a half or 2 hours while they were at another place, and then followed them out to their cars where they sat for another hour and talked, and then followed them all the way to their homes where they stopped them in the roadway, pulled them out of the vehicles, beat them both unconscious, potentially raped one of them, and then took the vehicle that they had just been pulled out of and stole their vehicle. And then went joyriding in it and broke some things and crashed some other stuff and did all this destruction, then came back, then put them back into their vehicle, then drove them back to their house, parked the vehicle that was all wrecked in their parking spot at their home, dragged them out of their car unconscious, tucked them into their beds, put the keys on the counter, and locked the door behind them as they left. And that was the story that was pitched.
That's completely believable.
Yeah, I'm totally sold, right? And then you go out there and you look and you're like, okay. And then it turns out, well, there's actually someone who's videotaping that. And it was two occupants who got into a fight and wrecked their own car and played slalom, with a couple of trees and then smashed another vehicle. And then they went home and they parked it and they were too drunk to remember any of it. And there was no sexual assault and there was no evidence of it. And suddenly you're the bad guy because you're like, there's no way that what you said was true. Just Occam's razor. It's actually impossible. Plus, there were eyewitnesses, bystanders who didn't care what happened, and they didn't see that. It was one car on the road.
Yeah.
So when you have these kind of things happen, it's like, okay, well, somebody told you something, and they have an angle, and somebody told you something about John Sullivan, and he had an angle. And once you realize what the angle is, you're like, well, you just don't want to pay the insurance payment on that wrecked new truck that you have because you got a $75,000 truck with $50,000 worth of damage to it.
But see that just happened in one of my most recent stories that I published a couple of weeks ago. The title of the story is "No Good Deed Goes Unpunished," and this was the story of a guy that I got a call from. He had already been through the trial, his J6 trial. He had already been convicted. His sentencing hearing was coming up in a couple of months. He had already petitioned the government 3 times for a retrial. And he had this incredibly believable story about him having assisted a dozen or so law enforcement officers inside the building and helped them work their way through the more hostile elements of the crowd, and then led them to the door. And that those were the actual law enforcement officers who then Tarek Johnson and the 2 Oath Keepers then came up the stairs and on the east side and then extracted them through the crowd. This was his story, and he told me that he had been denied access to the videos, this exculpatory evidence that would show that he was doing the work of a good person and assisting law enforcement that day, and it was denied to be presented in his trial. And could you please help me find this video? Very believable, very well-spoken gentleman named Damon Beckley. And I took that call only about 4 days before I was coincidentally going to be spending an entire week in the Capitol CCTV viewing room in D.C. with 2 other Blaze analysts that were going with me. And so I thought, okay, well, as it is, I'm going to be there anyway. Sure, I'll assign one of my guys to check out your story. So I put one of my guys on it, and I'm monitoring, looking over his shoulder as the day progresses for this guy through the Capitol. And actually what we saw on video was 180 degrees out of phase with the story that he gave me over the phone. It just didn't happen. Either his brain was Swiss cheese, like mine was that day, because I'm not a riot chasing, journalist. That's not what I do. And you were just talking, that's what brought this story to mind. When you're talking about a dispassionate observer or somebody that's experienced, an experienced war correspondent is probably going to handle that situation better than somebody like myself who's not experienced in that situation.
That's right.
And so especially the more experience you have and the more exposure you have to that kind of highly kinetic situation that's going on around you. And in this particular situation, I called the gentleman back that night, and I was trying to let him down gently. And Damon, man, I gave him a couple of examples of how my own brain was Swiss cheese that day. I don't recall things that I thought I saw, I didn't see. And then when I looked at my own video, I was like, oh crap, I was there. I don't even remember that.
Right.
And so I tried to explain that to him, and he said, no. He goes, you've got to go check. And he tied it in. He goes, you can see me in John Sullivan's video at the main house door and blah, 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 blah. And he's carrying on and carrying on. And he said, I must have, he goes, maybe you're right. But he said, I must have went back in because I'm telling you this happened. And we have I have his court documents. I have everything. I know exactly when he went in the building, right when he left the building. We had great photography of him. He was easy to pick out of the crowd on the CCTV. I put my guy back on it for another day.
Yeah. And
full day in there, it just didn't happen. So what did this guy do? So now I have done the work to try and help this gentleman and try and help him either get a retrial or at the very least help him in his sentencing.
Yep. Sounds like you're a Fed now.
Right. So what do you think was the net result of that?
Oh, I'm sure he was so grateful.
He goes online and then starts saying that I deliberately hid. Well, first of all, he told his followers online that I had found the exculpatory information and that I had told him that on December 22nd. Well, we never even talked on December. There is such a thing as a call log.
Yep.
it's very easy to see that I either texted or spoke to him on December 22nd. So he's very specific about that. And then the second thing he says is that I chose to hide and bury his exculpatory video to help me with my case.
Of course. Why not? This is the problem, though, because people who are serious and understand how logic works, and a lot of people don't, in our criminal system, you don't prove your innocence. That's not required of you. We don't do the Perry Mason thing where there's the defense attorney is actually out there proving who did the real bad thing and you were just accidentally set up and it just looked like you. That's not how the system works. They have to prove that you are guilty of the elements of a crime, which are very specific, and they are laid out in a thing called pattern jury instructions. The jury is judging based on an objective set of criteria. Now, they're going to bring their subjective bias to it, but you have to look at things where they are going to push the envelope, and the fact pattern has to show that you did the thing that is being alleged beyond any reasonable doubt, and that nobody would question it, and they have to feel very confident that the government proved their case. You don't have to prove you're innocent. You're presumed innocent. This is the nature of our system, and that's actually the best way to go. The problem is that people, especially folks online, which is why social media is not real, and I don't worry about it. I don't have 130,000 people following me anywhere I go. There's just me and sometimes my kids. And there's not a reality to making the argument, you have to prove that you're not a Fed, Steve Baker. You have to prove that you're not in bed with something. It's like, no, you need to present evidence that you think what you think is true is actually factually true. And this is where we'll wrap up with not a too long thing, but James O'Keefe just came out with a new video yesterday, and this was the biggest story he's ever done. That's very embarrassing for him. I think that should be very embarrassing, because when you get information, you have to look at the lens that the person is presenting that information in. Do they know that they are being held accountable to their words? Is it testimonial? In the case of a honeypotted, undercover camera, what is the motive of the person that is delivering said information? And in this case, it's a CIA contractor, supposedly, a green badge. In the federal service, we have green and blue badges. The blue badges are permanent employees. The green badges are like long-term temps. They can be disposed of at any moment. You can kick somebody off a contract and bring somebody new on any day. Some people do it because they're retired feds and they're a former blue badge and they want to get another income. Some of them just aren't good enough to be hired on in the, or there's not a need for that permanent position, and the government wants to be able to flex it. So there's a lot of reasons for green badges. This guy flashes an IC badge, which everybody gets. I got. You can get into Langley, you can get into the State Department, you can go any of the buildings. Not a big deal. I got it as a brand new agent for no reason, just because they said, hey, you should get an IC badge. And I went, oh, okay, I'm getting an IC badge. And now you have it in your wallet. It's like, And this guy, I wrote my damn pin on the back of it because I didn't know what the pin was because I never used the thing. I went into the State Department like twice. So you can get this kind of stuff. But when we look at these people, right, and you evaluate them, when a guy is on a date, what is his goal? What is the objective of the information he's purveying on the date? You've been on some dates in your life. You've seen some people in some bars.
90% of the time is to get laid.
Let's say it less aggressively. We would say that he is trying to make the other person like them. Would that be fair? You're trying to vibe with another human being.
Yeah. Two guys on a date. He's trying to get laid.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. So that's the grinder journalism. In this case, the video we just saw was actually a female and a male. The man is significantly older from the female based on the hands and the skin that I saw. It's just a guess, but that's how James does things. Very, very beautiful women. And if you're a, let's say, late 40s guy talking to a late 20s, early 30s-year-old female, and you're presenting information and she's really hanging on your every word because you are the most interesting man that she has ever met. A little bit of embellishment goes a long, long way in that setting, I guess, if you're a guy that's not married to the truth. And if your goal is to say that you're some computer cyber analyst guy who's a program manager, which would maybe be like a GS-14 level in the Bureau, that's what our program managers are. So you're a first line supervisor maybe as a contractor, and you want to present yourself to be the big dick guy that knows what the director of the CIA knows. Look, the presidential daily briefings are given out by different intelligence agencies. They all bring their stuff to it, right? There's not green badgers on that. There aren't contractors because that's a serious thing. They may be green badge reporting and analysis that's on it, but they're not the ones that have eyes on to the daily briefing. Those are long-term trusted people.
Right.
Anyhow.
And let's be honest, the guys that really know this kind of stuff, they're not going to talk about it anyway.
They're smart enough not to.
They don't talk about it.
Right?
They don't do it.
if you've been in this for a long time, if you're looking for clout, you're going to talk about it. The people that I know that worked at the CIA, it took forever to get them to tell me that they were. The guys that I knew that worked in special forces that were serious, quote unquote, quiet professionals, the ones that we thought we were dealing with, those guys are very cagey about it. What did you do for a living? Oh, I was in the Army. Oh, are you still in the Army?
Right.
No, I retired. What kind of work did you do? I was an infantryman. And you're like, okay, cool.
Or I'm in public relations or something.
They might give you a fake story. The ones that are smart would weave in the truth. And if you get down, oh, you're an infantryman by training. You're an 11 Bravo? No, I worked on some other kind of projects. Interesting. Like, do you have some deployments? Yeah, I've got 11 deployments in the last 18 years. And you're like, cool. Were you out of Bragg, Campbell?
I have a family member in the IC, and they don't talk about it. Period.
It's just a need to know basis, and you don't need to know.
And when asked, the first lie they tell is about what they do for a career.
Right. There's this old kind of goofy thing, and the FBI doesn't have secret agents, even though the agents seem to think that they are, and we know this now from dealing with them a lot. But the question is how are you going to get someone to trust you if you can't even tell them what you do for a living? It's like, I work for the FBI, and I work in counterintelligence. I'm looking for people that want to help me in the mission of America. If you're on the wrong team, you're still in America. This is still my backyard. There's one way to operate. Or you can go out there and be like, well, I work for the government. I work for the DOJ. It's like, do you work for the DOJ? No, you're an FBI agent. Just be who you are. And anyway, when people try to embellish things and they want to dance around the edges, the oldest game in DC is called Spot the Spook. Everybody does it. You've seen it.
Right.
Everybody wants to spot the spook. It's like, oh, are you really working for this part of the government? Oh, you work for the government? The people who try to play up and get mysterious about their jobs and try to act like they have a lot of influence usually have none. And the ones that try to downplay it are trying to ward off that thing because they know they can't talk about it or they'll lose their jobs. I will take the person that is very nonchalant and I will take them way more seriously than the guy being like, here's my badge. I work in the IC. Look what I do for a living. I work in the China Mission Control Unit. It's like, you're full of shit. You don't know things. And I know that because you're not trustworthy, because you're on a date with a stranger telling them about the stuff that you're not supposed to be talking about. It's because you don't know enough for it to matter. And by the way, if anybody read the Durham report or anybody saw the the Crossfire Hurricane 2019 Horowitz report, we already know this stuff. We know the government went after Trump. Like it's been proven by actual investigators, not by goofballs that claim it. Or some pretty girl.
And you know that I've played Spot the Spook because when I was involved in a particular meeting with a particular guy that I've written a particular story about, and this was an off the record meeting, and all of a sudden I see that guy that kind of shows up and he's pretending to be, and then all of a sudden he does this with his phone, pointing at you, and then
that's such
as soon
low
as I
level.
see that, as soon as I see that, I start taking pictures of them, and I've sent you.
That's right.
A couple of those shots.
And those people tend to be very either incompetent or new, sort of surreptitious photographers. We've had them follow us, and we're pretty confident of that when we were in Florida, me and Steve, friend, and we were out with Garrett O'Boyle and George Hill, and you walk around. You see totally alerting behavior because you used to watch people do that behavior and you would critique it. This is the easiest thing that I was going to end with. As someone who used to be a paramedic and I was an instructor, I instructed new paramedics, even though I didn't have a ton of experience and time. I'm a very dispassionate observer. When you are working on a patient, you only know so much. There's a reason why in any code or trauma bay, they always assign one nurse to just document what happened. Not hands-on, stands back and just, this is what happened, this is what the vitals were, this is how the patient reacted, this is when we pushed it, this was the timestamp. They do that without getting their hands involved, because the minute that you get involved in the treatment or in the scene or in the moment, you lose objectivity. You can't be objective. And so I will have very competent, brand new, squared away, knows all the book answers to everything going on paramedics who forget to do basic treatments, like maybe you give somebody Zofran because they keep ripping off their mask and vomiting, and all you want them to do is get oxygen because that's the problem. They're having trouble breathing. And you just let them do it because they'll never know it unless you let them go through the experience. You ask them those Socratic questions. They come to the truth like, oh shit, there was a better way to handle that and I didn't do it. Now I'll know the next time I'm in the fray that when I'm seeing this behavior, I've now done it. You have to get people to learn how to divorce themselves and turn down the volume on their personal experience. We're seeing this massive amount online of people just failing to be skeptics, to question their own assumptions the way you did with John Sullivan, the way that we should be doing with every bit of data that comes out. We all know that there is corruption in our government, and we all want to believe it all the time. The minute that you want to believe something is the one time that you should be the most skeptical. That's why you're an investigative journalist. That's why you're able to do the thing you do. That's why you and I are buddies, and why I like listening to what you have to say. I know that you will disconnect and you will, disable that instinct, and you'll fight it, and then you'll go and prove yourself wrong if you can, because that's actually a win too.
No, I think it's probably the way to approach every particular situation in which you're investigating, because if you are investigating with the end goal already in mind, then you're going to do everything in your power to achieve your presupposition.
Yep.
And that should never.
It's the opposite of
process.
science. Like you said, hypothesis earlier. The whole point of science is you think that something is going on, you go out and attempt to disprove it. You create an experiment to disprove it. And if that experiment is not successful, then you do it again and you do it again. And you keep trying to disprove the hypothesis until you run out of any logical experiments to evaluate whatever your assumptions are. And then you can basically say it's more likely true than not. Even that is not conclusive. But most people don't even have the word evidence and know what that is. And unfortunately, you not finding the thing that the guy told you that he knew happened on a day when his brain was Swiss cheese, that's not evidence that you're a Fed, it turns out, even if that's the common supposition. It's very frustrating for those who are watching it, I think. But anyway, if you listen to this podcast, you guys know, you know what it's all about, and you know what we're trying to do. We're trying to get to capital T truth by trying to just dismantle our own assumptions as we do so, and knowing that we're fallible.
Kyle, as usual, man, it's a pleasure always.
I appreciate you. You make my thoughts more clear. I hope that's the same. I know you're going to be writing a piece on this. Where can people follow the work? What's the best place to follow your work right now? I know we kind of moved from Substack, and now you're doing the Blaze. Where do you want to see
locals?
Locals.
Yeah, I'm still on the locals, and I do provide some kind of insider details about what's going on with my life, about what's going on with my case, even some behind the scene things on some of the stories that I work on. And so they can definitely go there, and they can basically find me anywhere at TPC4USA. And in terms of my locals, it's just TPC4USA.com. Obviously on X at TPC4USA. Same thing on Facebook, TPC4USA. But all of my stories that I'm working on with the Blaze, be they video or written articles, they've actually given me my own URL, and it's theblaze.com/truth. So I actually feel pretty honored that they gave me that.
That's awesome.
Theblaze.com/truth.
I will add that to the show notes for those of you who are looking for it. Folks, follow Steve Baker, who is our friend and a suspendable and an awesome guy. And thanks for jumping on with me on this Thursday morning, my friend.
As always, thank you, Kyle.
All right, bud. Let's pivot over here. We'll say thanks to the folks that support the program. If you guys want to support us, you can also get something tasty out of it. MattHatJerky.com/Kyle. Again, that's MattHatJerky.com/Kyle. Matt with 2 T's, hat with 1 T, jerky. Use the promo code Kyle, KYLE. You'll save 20%. That's a good deal. It's a great product. It's flavorful. It's tasty. And we only promote it because I actually eat it myself. I really like it. It's a high protein snack that has a, natural creation. It's not some garbage you get out of a grocery store or you get it out of a gas station. Check them out. MattHatJerky.com/Kyle. That supports us with a tasty product that you might want. We'll also, we'll go ahead and let you guys know that you can support us by going to MyPillow too. I'm still waiting. I have waited for it with the long, slow boat from Minnesota. MyPillow.com/Kyle. I'm trying to get my bath sheets, folks. I hate having lousy towels, and my towels are starting to get to that point where they're just like ragged and they start smelling no matter how many times you wash them. Use promo code Kyle over on MyPillow.com/Kyle. MyPillow.com/Kyle. Promo code Kyle saves you up to 50%. I used it myself. I think it was like a 30% discount on the towels. You guys can check it out. Go look at their bath towels. You look at their slippers, their slides, whatever the heck a slide is, and sheets and so on. Mike Lindell's company out there doing work and doing the best they can. He seems like a funny dude. Every time I've been on any of the conference calls with him, he's very self-effacing, which is kind of nice to have people that will make fun of themselves in a charming way. Lastly, we'll support the merch store, and you guys can do so as well. That's my friend Garrett O'Boyle making the shirts like this patch. Oh, this patch on this side. Here it is. We've got the PVC patches available. We've got the t-shirts. You guys can get the Kyle Seraphin Show shirts. The-suspendables.com. Again, the-suspendables.com. Promo code Kyle will save you 10% there. Just supporting them. No money in it for us, as we continue to tell you, but it is cool. And if you guys want to put something on that lets people know you listen to the Kyle Seraphin Show, you support the Suspendables, you can do so. We've got the hashtag RUSuspendable on the back, or the PT shirt, which is probably my favorite. It just says suspendable in stencils. You'll get questions. People want to know what it means, and you'll let them know. It doesn't mean you got suspended from the FBI. It just means that you're willing to get some discomfort in your life for doing the right thing. And we're always appreciative for you guys supporting my friends over there. All right, 5-star review. Let's throw one on the screen and let's wrap this sucker up. This one is coming from MLC Russell, coming out of the beginning of last month. It says, God bless the Suspendables. A little long one here, but we'll do it anyway. Get your interesting, relative, humorous, spiritual, and helpful daily dose of information with Kyle. His guests, like Steve Baker, and the Suspendables co-stars are engaging in informative topics that are relevant and interesting. His podcast offers a fresh perspective and seems designed to help you understand why the government is not working for you anymore. Even offering tips on what you can do about it. Prepare or repair. That's the word, folks. Highly recommend the Kyle Seraphin Show. 5 stars, including 5 little emoji stars. Really appreciate the 5-star review. That's fantastic stuff. And we're grateful, all of you. If you guys have not already, make sure that you have hit the like button over on Rumble. You can subscribe to the channel, hit the notifications. And you may not know it, but we have a website. It's kyleseraphin.com. If you guys have questions, comments, and I left out, but of course, sarcastic remarks, I appreciate all of those. Go to kyleseraphin.com and the contact me. You can send them in. If you got your review there and you don't use any of the other stuff, by all means, go to kyleseraphin.com. And remember that our show is brought to you by Patriot Coolers, Catholic Vote, Mad Hat Jerky, My Pillow, and thesuspendables.com. Promo code Kyle at any of the websites you can, and you'll save a little bit of money and you'll support us. We will see you guys again for a Friendly Friday. I look forward to it. I hope you have a wonderful Thursday. God bless you, and we'll see you in the morning.
Thanks for listening to The Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live weekdays on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Truth Social, and Instagram at Kyle Seraphin.